Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Asa Waldstein. I'm the founder and host of this regulatory education series, and I'm also the owner of my own regulatory consulting company called Supplement Advisory Group. Oh my goodness, we're in for a lot of fun today. We'll be talking about preparing for cannabinoid regulations, and we'll be reviewing this from a legislative, scientific, and practical point of view. We have Michael McGuffin, president of the American Herbal Products Association, sharing his deep industry knowledge. And we have Johnel Lagabon, representing the scientific experts at Burdock Group. So for our format today, we'll start off with the panel discussion that will lead into a Q&A with you. So please submit questions at any time through the Q&A tab on the top or bottom of your screen. And this is really designed to be interactive, so feel free to ask anything pertinent here, and we'll do our best to get to your questions. Quick little bit of housekeeping. We are recording the event, and a download link will be sent to all who sign up. And also a quick legal disclaimer. The views by myself and the panelists are our opinions only and do not constitute any legal or regulatory advice. So big thanks to Stephen Yeager, my dear friend. He's providing administrative help today. So thanks again, Stephen. He'll be dropping in detailed panelist bios and lots of great free resources in your chat box, which will allow you to get to know us and our companies better. And with that, let's get to the good part and allow me to introduce our panelists. Michael McGuffin is president of APA, and Johnel Lagabon is engagement manager at Burdock Group. Welcome, Michael and Johnel.
Thank you very much, Asa. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much.
Likewise.
Great to have you both. And we have a lot to cover today, so I think we'll jump right in. And please start with you, Michael. As we're aware, Bill HR 841 is in Congress. What's your opinion of this bill, and what does this mean if it passes for hemp companies?
Well, let me start with HR 841. It's a pretty good bill. As introduced, it would create a lawful pathway for dietary supplements that contain hemp or CBD. And it would make it clear that every other regulatory requirement that applies to every other herbal ingredient or botanical constituent also applies to hemp and CBD dietary supplements. So that's the first thing that it would mean for hemp companies. If it passes, you're treated just like any other dietary supplement. If there's a flaw in this legislation from the broad CBD industry perspective, it's that it applies only to dietary supplements. So it will not create a lawful pathway for food or beverage products that have added CBD. The thinking on this is that we should try to get the more achievable task done first. So get dietary supplements now and then come back later and see if we can get the pathway established for foods. Will it pass? It's got 23 co-sponsors, including 15 Democrats and 8 Republicans. So that's a sign of some broad support. There's not a companion bill in the Senate, though, and the Food and Drug Administration has made it clear that it wants a number of amendments made before further consideration is given to the bill. We've heard that the House Energy and Commerce Committee will likely schedule a hearing on this bill and possibly on the broader issue of cannabis decriminalization. So that too is a good sign. We've got the attention of the Congress. But we've also heard that House Energy and Commerce will want to include, or at least consider inclusion of some of FDA's requested amendments. Some of these we could probably live with and even support, authorizing FDA to prescribe specific labeling requirements, for example, and amending the definition under law of a prohibited act in a manner that would help FDA get those darn drug spike products off the market. But we're also concerned about some of FDA's requests, for example, to let the agency establish a quantitative limit on the amount of CBD that would be allowed in any dietary supplement product, or removing the GRAS option for a company to meet its pre-market safety obligations. And I know we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail. And then let me leave with, there's also a lot of opposition that's been expressed by a number of the so-called consumer groups who are, in my view, attempting to hold hemp hostage in order to force a number of broad changes to the overall dietary supplement law. So that's maybe a place we can begin the conversation.
Perfect. Thanks so much. That was excellent, Michael. And over to you, Johnel, to kind of set a foundational tone here. Can you quickly tell us the difference between NDINs and GRAS?
Thank you, Asa. And Michael, thank you for that good summary. And I think my next part of this really builds off the work you guys are doing with that bill. So I want to start off with a little disclaimer. I think everyone knows that CBD is going to be treated a little differently for many, many reasons. But I'm going to start off with addressing some of the standard ways that GRAS and NDINs work for dietary supplements. Now, let's start off with some similarities. At their core, they're very similar in that they're a safety dossier that basically says this ingredient is safe for this intended use. While there are many differences here and there with some of the content and structure, the purpose and what they have inside are pretty similar. Now let's get into some of the differences. I think I want to start with some of the most important difference that we want to address and establish is that GRAS, generally recognized as safe, is a pathway to get food ingredients approved. And there's a lot of things that we can discuss with that later, and I will get to that in a second. But one of the things that you have to do with general recognized as safe is that you need to get an expert panel to review it. And once you have that, then you are theoretically legal to sell. Now, on the other hand, an NDIN is an approval for a new dietary ingredient discovered or manufactured after 1994. And that is the process to get a new dietary ingredient to be able to sell that. Now, let me move forward before we even get into GRAS as a viable option, possibly. And some of the other differences between the two are study requirements. The first being for GRAS is that there is a reasonable certainty that's the type of standard you must meet for safety. And really, there are three key cornerstone data requirements for that. The first are making sure you have a 3-study genetic toxicity battery, aka genotox for many of those in industry, 14-day range finding oral study, and a 90-day subchronic oral study. That's kind of the cornerstone industry standard for getting a GRAS approved, at least via scientific procedures. On the other hand, an NDIN has those 3 key study requirements, but also has, based on the 2016 draft guidance by FDA, an inclusion of a recommendation for multi-generation rodent reproductive study with a minimum of 2 generations and a teratology study. However, the safety standard is the reasonable expectation of safety for an NDIN, which semantics, I know we're getting into semantics, but that's what we do in regulatory affairs, theoretically should be lower than reasonable certainty. However, that is theory, and practice has shown us that the threshold for NDIN is a bit higher, significantly higher than a GRAS. Now moving on to some strategic considerations. As I mentioned earlier, in order to sell for a GRAS, you only need to have an expert panel review your dossier. However, does that mean your clients will buy from you if you don't have, or if you just keep it self-affirmed? That's a maybe. Oftentimes, many clients will require that you notify your GRAS dossier and receive that letter of no objection because they are risk averse and they want to know that your GRAS you aren't taking advantage of the GRAS process. For the NDIN process, you have to submit your NDIN or notify it at least 75 days before you sell. However, there is a 90-day turnaround after submission or response time, which I would recommend waiting until you hear back from FDA because of the relatively high rejection rate. And there are many reasons why that is, but you should likely wait that 90 days instead of the 75. But you can sell, but that's the risk you should take. I think that's a good summary and a place for me to pause. Asa, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think you've touched on this, but anything more to add on, the difference between a self-affirmed GRAS or what's commonly called an FDA-GRAS or vice versa? You touched on the commercial components of why a company would want to receive this no objection letter. Is there any other considerations, confidentiality or anything there that we want to discuss about the difference between self and FDA-GRAS?
So first of all, you don't need to notify GRAS. And let's back up. GRAS is for food, approval for a food use. That's very important. Remember that. And you don't need to notify your GRAS to be able to sell. However, will people buy from you? That's a maybe. If you're trying to sell your ingredient to a Fortune 100 company, Coca-Cola's, Pepsi's in the world, they are likely going to require a FDA notification. So you really can't take advantage of that system or have dubious data. Your GRAS dossier must be high quality, and you will more than likely have to notify. But a lot of people, when they self-affirm, do so because for strategic reasons. They want to keep their data private, although you do have to publish your data, your safety data, and they don't want to send it to FDA and it become public information. So that is kind of the nutshell there. And Asa, I'm sorry if I'm going over. I think there's one more point that I need to address early on, is that I'm going back to the point where GRAS is for food status. So there is an important part of this that we need to address, is that you can use GRAS or something that has been in the food supply as a dietary ingredient. However, the issue there is that not all ingredients can be used as a food ingredient. And that's the issue with CBD. And I think based on what we're seeing, we do believe the FDA is currently leaning less towards allowing it in food and a lot more so leaning to dietary supplements. So I will add more to that later, but that's an important point that I will put out there pretty quickly. And I think Michael and I are pretty much on the same page on that.
Yeah, and let me based just on that last comment that Johnel just made, that FDA is leaning toward keeping CBD out of food. Back to 841, one of the key points that FDA has asked to be changed, they want the GRAS option gone. They refer to it as a loophole. It's actually a statutory option, but it's very hard to argue that CBD's already in the food when FDA won't allow CBD to be added to food. So it's a little bit of a, it's difficult to find the path that shows that you've got CBD in food and you can rely on that for your self-affirmed GRAS. I do want to make a couple of points in support of some of Johnel's comments. You've got both, you're going to make regulatory decisions and then you're going to make business decisions. And that's often
Agreed. Why
you notify FDA of your GRAS findings. I also think we need to be a little careful, though, citing that FDA in 2016 said that it wants some other studies to support an NDIN, a new dietary ingredient notification. That was draft guidance, never finalized. Right there at the beginning of it, it says is not binding. FDA really prefers it was binding, but it's not binding. So you do need to be a little careful as to whether you met that reasonable expectation even without the multi-generational or the genotox studies. And then I also think, Johnel, you mentioned something about the rejection rate or the failure rate of new dietary ingredient notifications. I will say it's a difficult standard. It's not easy to get to the 2-page letter that you want from FDA. It's lawful to go to market even if you don't get that. If FDA says we don't agree with you, you can still go to market, but then you're going to market with a document on FDA stationery that says we don't believe your product is safe. And you got to think about, again, there's a business decision.
I love the way you put that, the business and strategic decision.
But I also want to give some examples of that the failure rate's not as bad as we think. And I'll give I'm going to name a company. Palm Wonderful submitted their NDI notification to the Food and Drug Administration. This was 12, 15 years ago. And FDA said, and I'll paraphrase, not good enough. You didn't give us the information that we needed to make the decision. So Palm Wonderful resubmitted. FDA said, still not good enough. Palm Wonderful submitted a third time. FDA said, check, gave them the 2-page letter. Is that a 1/3, a 2/3 failure rate or 100% success rate? I call that 100% success rate, but because there were 3 separate NDI numbers, anybody that calculates it as a 2/3 failure rate. And I think the main point to make about this is try again. And Johnel's no doubt had this experience. You submit your notification, and if FDA doesn't believe that it gets to the point where they can agree with you that you've established safety, they're very detailed in their responses. They'll say, for example, you didn't clearly identify the ingredient, or we don't think that the study that you cited was directly relevant to your ingredient. They'll give you very specific, almost a pathway to resubmit. And our advice is always resubmit. Get back with Johnel's people, get back with the consultants and attorneys that you're using, and resubmit, because there are numerous instances in which you're successful the second or third time.
And that's why I mentioned that I think there's multiple reasons why that rejection rate is so high. And I think we'll get to some data reasons why in a bit, but I guess while we're on the topic, if you don't mind, I think one of the most important reasons why people miss that first approval or filing is that they don't adequately characterize their product. They don't identify it. And that's step one. I mean, how are you gonna get something approved that you can't scientifically describe? No one can follow it. No one can trust your safety data or whatever there is if there is no standard, or at least no identity. So I think for everyone here, and I think Michael will agree, is that if you have a first step in generating data, characterize your ingredients. That's probably where most of the problems start. And if you can get that, I think you're one step closer. And I think if everyone did that, I think the rejection rate would be a hell of a lot lower than what
it's the most common basis for FDA to communicate what they call, serious concerns about the submission, that they say, we couldn't really tell what your ingredient was. So let's use the example that we're here to discuss. If you were to submit an NDIN for your hemp extract, and you don't tell FDA what you're doing to control the THC level, you don't clearly disclose the solvents, you don't clearly identify your starting material as to cultivar, or even as to part of plant, or the concentration, you don't give them all those details about how you made it, and then how you analyzed it when you finished making it. We all know what they'll say is, we're not sure what your ingredient is, and so we're not even going to review the safety data. Start over. It's exactly the most important thing. And the agency also has some willingness to meet with you in advance. And they're very clear, they're not your consultant, they won't be your consultant, but they'll nod their heads in the right way, or they'll ask pointed questions, and they're happy to look at how you're describing your ingredient and tell you even before submission, that's not going to convince us that we know what your ingredient is. And again, with consultants like Burdock Group, they can set up those kinds of meetings for you, and you should take advantage of that. They're professionals there at FDA that they don't like the failure rate any more than we do.
No one does.
So,
but Michael, that's actually what we recommend, strongly recommend, is if you're going to go notify something to FDA, be it GRAS or FAP or NDIN, especially in this case, come in there with a plan, know your stuff, have an informed conversation, and I guarantee you they're helpful. Obviously, they'll voice their concerns to make sure that the public is safe. But if you go in there with a plan, you have a strong argument for safety, you know your stuff, everything is characterized, I'd say that you have a very good shot that they may buy into your plan. And once again, you talked about, that draft guidance recommendation for those stringent studies. Go in there with a strong plan. Go in there, be ready to defend it. And if you can, I think there's a good shot that your NDIN might be able to get through with that. But once again, I do recommend, and we always recommend, especially for NDINs, to have that meeting, because I think it really can save you a lot of time and heartache and lost opportunity cost by losing time having to resubmit, which takes a lot of time, Mike. I think I think Palm Olive, or not Palm Olive, that one company, how long did that process take? Do you remember?
It took them about a year and a half or 2 years.
Well, it's not too bad, because they didn't have to do new studies. But right, if you are recommended to go to the drawing board and do certain studies, that could really.
I mean, and this was Palm Wonderful. This was their pomegranate extract. This is like, they grow their own fruit.
Yeah.
They're a big company. They own the water in California, but again, they went back and they corrected the points that FDA asked them to correct.
I wanted to ask, those are great comments. Are we aware, have companies submitted an NDIN for any of their hemp cannabinoid products to date? Is that anything we're aware of?
There have been, I think, 2 or maybe 3 that clearly did not have Johnel's fingerprints on them. I think one of them was 3 pages. And it wasn't quite, well, me and my mom used it and we feel pretty good. It wasn't quite that limited, but it didn't come anywhere near the kind of information that you're required to submit or that's expected to be submitted. But I haven't seen one that was a thorough presentation that took seriously the obligation that we all understand is required for bringing a new dietary ingredient to market. I have been told that there are companies that are prepared to do so, that have the science in place. But right now, while this regulatory door is shut by FDA's interpretation of the current law, some of those very high quality ones have not yet been submitted, is my understanding.
Yeah, Michael, thank you for shedding light on that. I will talk in general terms, but I have spoken with individuals as well about potentially doing NDINs and getting data together. I think really the fear for many of them is that they don't want to get a clear no. And I think they're waiting for this bill to pass, or at least some sort of option where they get light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. But in the meantime, you're right, they're getting ready to get data together. And that's actually one of our recommendations too, is if you're not ready to pull the trigger, you're not ready to take that risk, getting that clear no, get your data together, get ready. Be a reputable dietary supplement company. Get your argument together. So on the non-official notified side, those are some of the things I've been hearing, and at least with the lab friends I have too. But that's another story.
No, let me start with a presupposition. This is a safe herb. Hemp is a safe herb. CBD is a safe constituent, and I'm using the word safe in a general term. It's not like, we don't stack up toxic stuff on the planet. Here's plutonium and then here's CBD. No. It's more like here's CBD and here's fruits and vegetables. It's not a highly toxic substance. We're going to be successful in bringing this product to market safely. We're just going to have to meet the statutory obligation to go through the process of sharing information with the Food and Drug Administration.
I like that. And we did a poll, which I shared, and I'll just quickly go over it. We asked attendees, have they conducted safety studies on their hemp products? Now, around a third of the people said yes, but around 48%, or about half of the attendees, said they have not yet conducted safety studies on their hemp products. So that shows me that there's a huge opportunity here. And that's a good segue. Why don't we please start with you, Michael? What can companies be doing now to prepare for the future of hemp regulations?
Act like you're already regulated.
Agreed.
Manufacture your product in a facility that is compliant with 21 CFR 111. And if you don't know what that means, contact Asa or think about driving for Uber, because you have to know what that means. And you have to just comply. You just have to meet all the obligations, which starts with that you have to be able to conduct at least one test or examination to verify the identity of the ingredient that you're using, your CBD or your hemp ingredient, and all of the other dietary ingredients. Act like the adverse event reporting requirement already exists for you. That is, make sure that when you're going to have customer complaints. It happens in business. And so you need to keep a file of those. You need to keep them orderly. You need to separate them between product quality complaints and people who say I had an adverse event and I associate it with your product. And then you have to separate those into non-serious and serious. And the serious ones you're supposed to submit to the Food and Drug Administration. And I don't, ask your lawyer, as Asa said at the outset, nothing here is legal advice, but I don't think there's a problem with submitting those now. I don't think FDA is going to tell you you're not allowed to submit it because you're selling a product that we have not yet created a pathway. The obvious one, label claims, don't make any drug claims. The primary area where FDA is already regulating these goods are products that are making what we call SDCs, stupid drug claims. Don't make stupid drug claims. Don't say that your product.
I'm gonna remember that down. SDC. That's the official opera term. Is SDC.
Don't say your product cures any diseases. Don't mention arthritis. Don't mention chronic back pain. Don't mention, don't make any claim like that. And if you do make claims that are allowed, make sure those are substantiated. And then I'm repeating, get your pre-market safety information together now. And then the day after 841 or a similar bill passes, then you can put your forever stamp on it and mail it on in. But it's not too early to start putting your safety dossier together now.
I love that.
That's what I think you need to be doing.
That, Michael. And I wanted to just add and plug a couple OPPA resources that Stephen has dropped links into the chat box. One is for a wonderful webinar put on by OPPA called CGMP Basics for Hemp CBD Companies. That really dovetails into what Michael said. If you don't know what CFR 111 is, find out. Here's a great, wonderful resource from OPPA to find that out. And I love your comment on the adverse event or serious adverse event reporting. It's just responsible commerce to report any serious adverse events in your hemp products or any other type of supplement. And I treat hemp products just like a dietary ingredient in my practice. Make sure you report those. And I would also like to quickly plug in terms of free resources. We've got an event coming up, a supplement event. It's for supplemented hemp products through our regulatory education series event. It's June 3rd, it's free, and it's called Distributor Requirements for Hemp CBD and Dietary Supplement Products. And we'll be going into more detail about adverse event reporting, recall, and stuff during that point. And yeah, this is really excellent. Oh, and here's a wonderful thing. I want to say thank you so much to OPPA staff and Amber and Natasha and everyone for sharing this. But OPPA put on a 3-hour NDI-GRAS webinar at the recent Hemp CBD Congress. And today, we're giving it for free to everybody who's attending this call. So I know Stephen dropped in those links. So it's a 3-hour detailed workshop from OPPA. So thanks again, OPPA. I don't know if you knew this, Michael, but thanks again, OPPA, for sharing this with all our attendees today. It's a great resource. Johnel, what do you have to add on what can companies be doing now to prepare, please?
Man, Mike and I are reading each other's minds right now. But I will add one thing Mike didn't mention is be a member of OPPA. I know you did at Asa, but be a reputable dietary supplement company. Be part of those organizations that are responsible for making sure that you guys know your stuff. So in addition to making sure you're compliant with the existing dietary supplement regulations, I'd say continue to distance yourself from any drug regulations. I love the term you used, Michael. Is it SDC, stupid drug claims? That's something you should do your best to distance yourself from, because as everyone here knows, there's drama here. There's a Epidiolex, which is a CBD drug, and that goes against all precedent that they're allowing CBD as a potential dietary supplement or food. So distance yourself. Don't make it easy on FDA. Don't make any drug claims. Be compliant as a dietary supplement. Break against the mold. Don't be one of the people in the Wild West dietary supplements. Be reputable. Call Asa. Asa knows his stuff. So those are the things I just would add on. And basically, we're on the same page. Distance yourself from drug claims. Don't do anything in food. Stick in that dietary supplement space, because I think that's probably the first step anyone could ever get, is that space.
Yep, that's wonderful. And I also wanted to point out, thank you for that, I think we're all pretty aware that we shouldn't put the stupid drug claims on our labels. But when you look at the 30,000-foot view of compliance, the FDA and FTC in particular, they look at your complete online persona. So a company might not saying CBD for anxiety, but in the product reviews and the hashtags and the testimonials and the meta tags and on the blogs, those blogs that kind of blur the line between education or education for commerce, those are all considered extensions to the label and can definitely attract a warning letter here. So I wanted to move on and ask you, Johnel, as an expert in the space, can you walk us through your company's process when a hemp customer is looking to conduct a self-GRAS or NDIN, please?
Fantastic. Well, didn't I tell you Asa knew stuff? Okay, so there are many ways we can help, and it really just depends on what you guys are looking for. Some companies are ready to go. Let's start these studies. Let's compose this dossier. But many clients typically like to pause and want to know the end goal and understand some of the risks associated with it. They want to know the plan. And for those, we typically do what's called a feasibility assessment, a gap analysis of sorts, where we take a look at the science, we take a look at regulatory precedent, and come up with a recommendation on how to address some of these obstacles. And I think that many clients use that either to get funding or just to do it on their own to a certain extent and have us walk with them as needed. And I guess that segues to the way we help most of our clients, which is we work on an hourly basis. You want to talk to us? Give me a call. We can help out in whatever way you need. And we want to be as flexible as possible. We like to integrate ourselves as an extension of your regulatory team.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, I want to say that before the event, we received over 300 questions, which is really amazing. It shows me how engaged everyone is. So thank you so much to everyone who submitted your 300 questions or more before the event today. This is a record-breaking event. I think we're going to definitely get close to the 450, 500 attendees here. So thank you so much for everyone. So really now is the Q&A section of our event, and I've continued to see a lot of wonderful questions come in. So Stephen Yeager, maybe I'll turn it over to you for the Q&A section, please.
All right, yeah, the questions are coming in. Great discussion, everyone. Michael, let's start with you. What NDI responsibilities do extract suppliers have versus manufacturers of a finished product?
Unmute. The statutory requirement, so the words in the law specifically require that either the manufacturer or the distributor of either the dietary ingredient or the dietary supplement have the pre-market safety obligation, have the obligation to provide the information to FDA that's the basis for their determination that the dietary supplement containing the product will be reasonably expected to be safe. So I've always thought that it's obviously more efficient if the ingredients manufacturer undertakes this responsibility, at least if the ingredient supplier has more than one customer for the ingredient. But a manufacturer of a finished product that uses a CBD ingredient or a hemp ingredient that has already gone through the NDIN process would still need to confirm, one, that the supplier had actually, you'd ask for a copy. Can I see the submission that you made? Can I see FDA's response? But you'd also have to confirm that the conditions of use, or the intended use, is the term that Johnel used, described in the new dietary ingredient notification, are the same as in your product. So that's required that conditions of use be described, and that's going to be how much, how often, any populations that you're instructing not to use it. If the NDIN says it's 100 milligrams a day, not intended for persons under the age of 18 or pregnant or nursing women, you'd have to follow those same conditions of use. And importantly, a lot of the new dietary ingredient notifications only identify the ingredient. And so FDA tends to want to see a separate new dietary ingredient notification for every dietary supplement that contains the new dietary ingredient. We have presented an alternative to that, that as long as the notification is broad in its description of the conditions of use, for example, if it says used with or without other herbal ingredients or with or without other dietary ingredients, as long as those conditions of use match your product, you shouldn't have to submit a separate new dietary ingredient notification for your separate dietary supplement. So those are a bunch of conditions there. Your ingredient supplier's already done the work, and your product meets the description that was included in their notification. If none of that's true, you get to kind of start over.
So it sounds like if a material supplier wants to think about gaining, being strategic, smart, and ethical and reputable, they could go ahead and say, I have this approved new dietary ingredient notification for my hemp oil used at 100 milligrams in this bottle in this conditions of use. So it sounds like that's a huge opportunity. Did I kind of sum that up correctly?
And I'm repeating myself. You've got a regulatory decision to make, and that is follow the rule. Now you got a business decision to make, which is how do you plan your NDIN so that it has broad application, and how do you market that fact? That's the time that, again, I'm mentioned earlier, you don't actually have to get FDA's approval to go to market. You file the notice 75 days later, you can go to market. There are a few exceptions, but you want to get the 2-page response, the one where FDA says that they have filed it. That's really all they say, because then you can brag about that. Then you can show your customers why you're a better vendor for the ingredient than your competitors if you've completed that process. It's a good business decision.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, next question. Maybe this one for Johnel. If a company does self-GRAS, do they need to submit an NDIN?
I think we established that pretty quickly that, first of all, self-GRAS is possible for use as a dietary supplement, but only for certain ingredients. And when I think about those types of ingredients, I'm thinking more along the lines of excipients, processing aids, things with actual food utility that can be used as part of a dietary supplement. However, in the case of CBD, I do not believe that self-GRAS is a viable alternative, because I think it's pretty clear, and I think it's leaning strongly this way, that CBD is not food. So therefore, you cannot GRAS it. So I will say that, let's go back to the typical self-GRAS situation. You typically don't. You don't need to submit an NDIN if you do a self-GRAS and it is an ingredient that can qualify for that exemption. However, as I mentioned, if it is not a food and you get a letter from FDA stating as much, you might be asked to submit an NDIN. And that self-GRAS may not be applicable, and therefore you will have to submit an NDIN. But under typical circumstances, if your food or food ingredient actually meets criteria of something that can meet that exemption, you don't have to. But in the case of CBD, you likely will if they call you out on it, especially.
Right. Thank you. Next question, Michael. What is the risk or penalties associated with introducing an NDI into commerce without going through the NDIN process?
The word in the law is adulterated. A dietary supplement that contains a new dietary ingredient shall be deemed adulterated unless it meets one of the two requirements, and that's either the new dietary ingredient notification or it contains only dietary ingredients that have been present in the food supply as an article used for food. And it's got to be in a form in which the food has not been chemically altered. There is one ingredient, or actually there are 3 ingredients that are hemp related, not so much CBD related. FDA has already received, reviewed, and responded with what's called a no questions letter for 3 hemp ingredients. So if you wanted to put your hemp seed oil in a capsule and sell it as a dietary supplement, then you could rely on a GRAS affirmation, self-GRAS.
Yes.
Because the FDA-GRN response is already there. And the same is true with hemp protein, and the same is true with, hemp seed powder.
Meal, was it?
Hemp seed meal, I think that's right. But other than that, it's very hard to argue that you've got the GRAS notification. So again, back to the question, if you ignore it, what's the pain? What's the burden? Well, you're susceptible to the agency saying that your product is adulterated. We haven't seen a tremendous amount of enforcement on that. That's not just a CBD or hemp issue. On new dietary ingredients generally, we think there are more in the market than there are the subject of new dietary ingredient notifications. And quite recently, FDA now has an import alert, a specific import alert for ingredients that it has determined are new dietary ingredients for which a notification has not been submitted. So unless you're getting your product grown in the United States and made in the United States, you would have an import restriction there. Right now, there's only one ingredient on that, and it's one of those weird hegemine. I don't know what it is, but it's not anywhere near a botanical. And we've asked FDA to plan to expand that list, and they said yes for ingredients that meet those particular criteria. But it's an interesting question. What happens if I break the law? I'm going to go back to, you've got a business decision to make. You got a regulatory decision to make, and that's a place where they intersect pretty closely, I think. Unless you can clearly argue that your ingredient is an article used for food, easy with hemp, much more difficult with CBD. It's really just go ahead and get the work done. I know it's expensive, but if you're in it for the long haul, that's just the cost of doing business.
And Michael, building on that, you know what you said, regulatory and strategic decision. We understand both of them, but we like to lump them up in terms of what is your affinity for risk and what are your clients' affinity for risk. And that can kind of summarize everything in the sense of if you're trying to sell to the Pepsis in the world, they don't have an affinity for risk. No, you're not going to sell to them. And that's kind of the whole compliance puzzle, so to speak. I mean, it's unfortunately black and white. It's you're compliant or not, but you can lower your risk by being more compliant and staying away from SDCs, especially. So I get it. I think affinity for risk is very important. Understanding that at least.
All right. Next question. I think this will go to Johnel. What role does real-world data being collected by companies like ValidCare play a role in the NDIN or GRAS process?
Well, first of all, I think data is great in general. And I think a note on that, and kudos to the folks at ValidCare for collecting some good real-world data. But when you put that with NDINs and GRAS, not all data is created equal. I do think that when it comes to food, dietary supplement type of data, you want to make sure that the data is not clinical. It's not ones that address populations that are unhealthy or those who have diseases. You really want to make sure it's preclinical as much as possible and on healthy populations. And you really want to distance yourself from those potential claims that you could make. So your findings and the type of results you get, you really want to be careful what you're trying to claim your results are in your studies. So with that, I mean, I know everyone wants sexy data. Everyone wants something that says that your product does something amazing, but that goes almost more into the pile of, oh, wow, we have more drug data. So that's my note on data. Just know that in the food space, not sexy data, nothing dying, no one being cured is a better alternative than curing everybody. But kudos to people at ValidCare for collecting data, and I hope that helps you guys in your data collection efforts. Try to make sure that it's not drug type of data.
All right. I got another question maybe for either of you. What practical steps will small scale producers of CBD oils and salves need to do?
The FDA hasn't expressed any concern to date about external use. So salves, and the laws are completely different. A salve is a cosmetic as long as you don't make a claim about it. And the regulation for cosmetics is far simpler, far less burdensome. And FDA has specifically discussed CBD in topical products where they say they don't say we love it, why don't you bring them to market, but they also acknowledge that there's no specific statutory restriction. In terms of small manufacturers, though, they're small scale producers, there's no break for small companies. The adulteration clause is exactly the same for a startup as it is for a multinational. You still have to comply.
Okay, next question. Will naturally occurring cannabinoid profiles in a full or CO2 extract require an NDI?
In short, yes. And I'd say that the manufacturing process of either of those could make it so that they are considered different products and may require two distinct NDIs. But it's one of those things where you really have to take a look at the identity. And I think FDA's biggest concern is making sure that not only is the end product specification defined, you also need to, or at least NDI is specific to the end product specifications as well as manufacturing process. So at least that's what I've seen. And I do believe that you will need, for either of those, an NDI. You might need two, or you might be able to make the case that one is similar enough to the other. But I do think you will need an NDI, regardless of if it's natural or not. It doesn't matter.
And I think it's nearly certain that FDA thinks you need an NDI.
I think so too.
Okay.
Stephen, we got a couple more on there. I think we've got a few more minutes.
Yep.
Sure.
What is approximately the cost per SKU of having an ingredient through the characterization, stability, and safety studies for GRAS? What is an approximate timeline?
For GRAS, I'd say that if we did those 3 types of studies I analyzed or outlined earlier, which is your genotox battery, which is different depending on the type of ingredients you have, and 14-day range finding study, 90-day subchronic, in addition to the tests necessary for characterizing specifications, I probably could see that being $250,000, $220,000. And I think that's not something I mandate. That's something labs do, and you need to talk to certain labs about that. So if you're interested in that kind of work, talk to Satish Patel and Johnel Lagabon at Product Safety Labs. They can definitely handle that way better than I can. But that's probably a conservative estimate, I think.
Okay. Another question. Do you foresee labeling requirements to include all cannabinoids and the percentage amount in the end-use supplements?
I hope not. One of my many quips, I need to get t-shirts made. It's just another herb. Hemp is just another herb. And so I'm not required to quantify all of the constituents in my chamomile tincture or my echinacea tablets. I'm allowed to, and I need to be able to confirm that that's what's there. But the idea that it would be required, I just don't see it. I think a lot of companies want to disclose that information, but it should be classified, categorized, regulated as similarly to other botanicals as possible. There's really no reason to treat this one differently.
And we're oftentimes, we hear about the red yeast rice example when we're looking at cannabinoids. Is there anything you could talk about on, what we can learn from the red yeast rice example and how that may apply here?
Well, the main factor, and if you don't mind, let me misbehave for a moment. A very short version response to somebody that has a question about Delta 8. I would not be planning to invest significantly with a long-term strategy to sell a lot of Delta 8. My prediction is it won't stay on the market very long. I could be wrong, but again, just because I know that that's of interest, I think there's a near inevitability there. But so the red yeast rice case, so a company came into the marketplace selling a product as a natural source of lovastatin. Lovastatin, a drug approved by Merck to control cholesterol. And here came Pharmanex selling their, what was it called? Cholestin, which was red yeast rice with exactly the same amount of lovastatin. And they were deliberately manufacturing that in a way to ensure that they had that level of lovastatin. So there's an initial parallel. And the court case, the court decision finally made that product unlawful. And so there is that precedent that if you're directly trying to control your manufacturing in order to produce the drug, the FDA's position is, well, then you are producing the drug. You're no longer producing the natural product, you're producing the drug. But a key factor in the marketing of Cholestin was that the company said, you can use this instead of the drug. That was a big mistake. That part of the precedent we should all learn from. And we shouldn't be saying, you should use my CBD product instead of Epidiolex, or to treat your infants with these terrible epileptic diseases. I do want to make one point, and one of my colleagues in the medical marijuana world pointed this out some years ago. everything that we're talking about here are hemp CBD as dietary supplements. If you're in a state that has made medical marijuana legal, the claims allowance is completely different. Those are drugs. Those are allowed to be talked about in that manner. But again, I'm going to pull us back on focus. We're talking about CBD hemp as supplements. So that's the main learnings of the pain felt by that company that brought Colestin to the market is don't try to represent it as a natural substitute for the drug. You will get the Food and Drug Administration's attention, and then those criteria that the company was using to make sure that they got plenty of lovastatin. We all need to look at those and see how far away from those criteria we can be with the manufacturer of our CBD and hemp products. I think it's pretty easy with hemp. Hemp is, to make a hemp tincture, you can bring that to market with a lot more readiness, I think. As soon as you're trying to sell CBD, and this is what I'm back to 841. What 841 is trying to overcome is the restriction that exists in the statute against dietary supplement companies marketing a product that's been approved as a drug. It was intended to protect drug research, and we all have an interest in that. We could argue that it's not as balanced as it should be, but that would be a different 2-hour webinar, wouldn't it? So.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I just received a message. Some of the links that we sent through maybe are not being clean or not populating. So I'll make sure that in follow-up, I clean that up and everyone has the up-to-date link. So sorry about that. That might have been on the NDI-GRAS webinar link. So apologize about that. And again, a lot of great resources shared by Michael and Johnel today. And then I know that Steven's dropped in tons of great links, more about the American Herbal Products Association. If you don't know that I'm a fan, I also have the great honor of chairing Apa's Cannabis Committee. And so I have my banner set up here in my home office, my command center, which is also my living room too. And my cat's over there in the corner staring at me saying, why are you getting so excited talking about hemp cannabinoids and NDI-GRAS? It's because it's really important. It's important to protect companies and also plan for the future. A couple other links that we shared today was APA's guidance on labeling, which is applicable for all dietary supplement and herbal supplements, including hemp cannabinoids. And also we shared a link for the new APA hemp lexicon, which is just really, really exciting. So I think we're kind of winding down here. Stephen, do we have one more short question to pop in there, or should I kind of start to round it out?
No, I think you should wind it down. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to say thanks to everyone. It's been really wonderful. And so for a final question, and you can take some time and elaborate with this, we'll start with you, Johnel, and then over to Michael. What resources do your organizations have for hemp companies? And please also tell us the best way to learn more about what you do.
Aside from our brains, I think the biggest resource we have here at our company is our website, really. We pretty much post everything on there. Take a look at our newsletters. We like to talk about relevant issues. And also we have most of our content there too, our webinars. So I would recommend that. And we have some pretty good articles about our summation of the GRAS NDI process, even animal feed stuff. So take a look at that. And I'd say that if you want to contact us, you know where to find us. I think info@burdockgroup.com is a good place to start, and we can chat there.
Perfect. And over to you, Michael.
Well, I did not know how much attention you and Johnel were going to pay to the resources or that Stephen's posting. So I'm being a little redundant here. Maybe just an historical marker. APA founded its cannabis committee in 2010. So that's 11 years ago. And there was a kind of an industry response that sounded like this: you did what? And now it's shifted to, well, how did you know? So we've been really engaged in this for over a decade. Certainly the best way to find our resources is to join the APA Cannabis Committee. You can go to ahpa.org and a drop-down menu to committees. You'll see information there. The resources that Asa just mentioned, the hemp lexicon, we put that together because we were concerned that there's confusion in the marketplace as to what these various terms mean, especially some of the most widely used terms: broad spectrum extract, full spectrum extract, what does that mean? Or, go back several years, CBD oil, what is that? So we've tried to organize with a combination of individuals with significant experience in the botanical world, the legacy companies, the legacy players, people have been at it for 20, 30 years or more, and some of the active companies in the marketing of hemp and CBD. And we've gotten what we think is a really good guidance on what these terms should mean. We've also got some specific guidance on California Proposition 65. We joke now it's the only topic that comes up at every committee meeting. We've got 14 committees, and Proposition 65 is apparently on the agenda of every one of those. So for a long time, we've had guidance on general compliance for Prop 65 for herbal products, but we do now have a separate one for hemp products and for cannabis products, because there are specific issues that companies that market those products face in California.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And can you quickly touch on APA's NDI database? I know you spent lots and lots of time on this and continue to update this. What's a kind of a quick, 1 minute about APA's NDI database for people that may not know?
Sure. When the NDI notifications first started being submitted to the Food and Drug Administration, the dietary supplement law was passed in 1994, and I'm pretty sure that the first submission was in 1997. It was for stevia. And so I had to read them all. Natasha Weaver and I would gather them, and she'd keep them organized, and I'd review them. And at some moment, it was just a mess on my desk. And so I said, we need to create this as a database. And then we realized, other people need this database. So it's a database it's ndi.apa.org. And it has a modest cost. I don't remember what it is, an annual subscription. And we keep all of the new dietary ingredient notifications that have been submitted to FDA to date on the site. And so you can click on the link to get the actual document. We provide a summary outcome statement. Did FDA acknowledge it? Did FDA object to it? And if so, why? We provide a couple of details on each of those. It's searchable by the name of the ingredient, by the name of the company. So it's a very good resource if you need to go back and look at. We can learn a lot by reviewing notifications submitted by other companies and see what they did that was successful and what they did that wasn't. So that's its main purpose, and it's out there for all to access.
What a great resource. Thank you for that. And I'll make sure that we get a link in the chat box or shared with attendees after the event. So thank you again, Johnel and Michael. And as a reminder, you can head over to asawaldstein.com. That's my name, asawaldstein.com, to read my regulatory blog, my helpful hints videos, my past webinar links. I love this stuff. I'm really passionate about it. And I just developed a whole informational page around free support. And you can also learn more about my consulting services there at Supplement Advisory Group. Now, as a reminder, as I mentioned earlier, our next regulatory education series event is on June 3rd, and it's on pitfalls to avoid when distributing hemp products and supplement products as well too. And you can learn more about that at my website. And I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but APA's Botanical Congress is coming up on May 24th. It's a really, really great event. And I've dropped a link, or Steven's dropped a link into your chat box for that here. So I just wanted to say thank you to all the attendees out there for sticking with us. I had a really great time. Thank you again for all the great questions. Thank you, Stephen Yeager, for your great administrative support. I couldn't have done this without you. And really huge thanks to you, Michael and Johnel, for being here today and sharing your expertise.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having me.
And with that, it does conclude our webinar, and I wish everyone a great day. Be well and be safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Asa.